Já děkuji Ingrid Stegmanové a Janu Sixtovi za úvodní proslovy, za přivítání. Možná si trošku půjčím dva náměty z vašich proslovů k tomu, abych uvedl ten první panel. Vy jste zmínili, pan Sixta zmínil, že ten proces zadávání veřejných zakázek není snadný, že je to těžká práce. Paní Stegmanová mluvila o stezce odvahy, na kterou je třeba se vydat, možná když chceme být inovativní. Já věřím, že první panel, který pokryje takovou nadnárodní úroveň, tak nám ukáže, že ta stezka je minimálně označkovaná, že se dá tudy jít, že má podporu, že je na ní nějaký podpůrný systém, který nám nedá se ztratit. A věřím, že ten první panel, stejně jako i ty ostatní, nám pomůže se pozitivně naladit pro to, proč tuhle těžkou práci na nesnadné stezce stojí za to zkoušet. A jen ještě řeknu, že na kontrolní mechanismy se podíváme zítra dopoledne v druhém panelu. Takže kdyby vás zajímalo i to, jak fungují auditoři, tak i k tomu se dostaneme. A teď bych požádal účastníky prvního panelu, aby se ke mně přidali. Farid, Yaker, Erika, Bozzay a Anna Lupi. Pojďte prosím k nám. Come and join us, please. Já už jsem naznačil, že ta úvodní panelová diskuze nabídne pohled mezinárodních institucí na využívání veřejných zakázek jako strategického nástroje k naplňování vytýčených cílů. A vyslechneme celkem 3 odborné příspěvky. Počkám, my všichni rozuměli. Ty příspěvky přednesou Farid Yaker, který tady zastupuje Organizaci spojených národů, Erika Bozzay, která zastupuje Organizaci pro hospodářskou spolupráci a rozvoj OECD, a Anna Lupi, která tady zastupuje Evropskou komisi. Na panelovou diskuzi máme 50 minut a jsme s řečníky domluveni tak, že každý z nich má připravenou prezentaci, která by měla trvat přibližně 10 minut. Pak nám tu stává 20 minut pro nějaké komentáře vzájemné mezi našimi řečníky a pro případné otázky, které můžou tady zaznít z pléna. Taky jsem domluvený s řečníky, že jim minutu před koncem toho 10minutového času můžu říct, že ještě je minuta a že jim to nebude vadit, když je na to upozorním, tak to říkám i vám, že jsem dostal svolení, takže to můžu udělat. A dovolte mi tedy, abych přivítal už prvního řečníka. Farid Yaker vede od roku 2008 program OSN pro životní prostředí pod zkratkou UNEP a tématu nebo problematice životního prostředí se věnuje už téměř 3 desetiletí. Farid, the floor is yours.
Use this.
Můžeme použít i tenhle mikrofon? Jo.
Hello, hello. Hello? Yeah. Thank you very much, Peter. Wow, very good sound. Thanks for the invitation, and I'm happy to see that we have the right gender balance here at the panel. And it's great to speak before a broad audience, to see that this subject attracts your attention. So I look forward to a very useful and very productive conference. So I'm Farid Yaker. I'm from UN Environment, United Nations Environment, which is the agency in the UN which follows environmental issues. I work on sustainable public procurement, I will say SPP, and we try through sustainability, through SPP, to accelerate the shift to greener economies, and our main job is to assist governments in developing SPP policies and also to foster regional cooperation on the subject. We are really focused right now on supporting the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. How many of you haven't heard about the Sustainable Development Goals? Very few people. So I suppose most of you heard about the SDGs, so that's great. And we focus specifically, you know that there are 17 goals. We focus specifically on goal number 12 in my unit, which is on the aspects of consumption and production. And this includes, of course, SPP. You may not know that there is a specific target for SPP in the SDGs. There are, targets. Yeah, there is 169 targets, and one of them is on SPP. And the idea is to promote public procurement practices that are sustainable in accordance with national policies and priorities. So you see that this topic is also recognized as a major issue by the international community in the development agenda, the 2030 development agenda. And there is also a specific indicator which says that, which is measuring the number of countries that are implementing sustainable public procurement policies and action plans. It means that we are going to decide by next year, I think, which countries are implementing in reality SPP and which are not yet implementing SPP. I say yet because it's a global movement and everyone is embarking on it. It's just that some are really putting the means and the resources to implement, and some are not yet really in full steam. So we're in charge in UNEP to measure or to develop the methodology for the 12.7 target. And we are pilot testing right now. We have 17 countries that have responded to the draft index and have provided comments and have started to measure, and it went fine. We were able to score, the countries according to this index. And we are developing, the idea is to have a threshold. Above this threshold, we can consider that countries are implementing, and below the threshold, they're not yet implementing. So what are you see here that we use a number of sub-indicators. So A to I are what we call sub-indicators. It's a composite index to find out if there is implementation or not. So I will go quickly over the aspects that we will measure. And this, I think, will be interesting for you. First of all, does the country have an action plan and or regulatory requirements? I think is the case for Czech Republic. Then and it's interesting for this conference because does the plan consider the 3 dimensions of sustainability? Is it aligned with national strategies? Many countries are only putting the focus on green public procurement. We want to reward those that have a balanced approach, that are also considering social aspects, and I think this conference is a lot about this. Is the legal framework conducive to SPP? Do we have staff being supported or funded to implement SPP policy? What is the training policy? What is the practical support delivered to public procurement practitioners? This is really the most popular sub-indicator, where we measure whether you're developing guidelines and tools, whether you have a dedicated website, newsletters, a help desk. This is something you look for, best practices, networks of practitioners, etc. And the next one is on the development of purchasing criteria. Does the country develop purchasing criteria for specific products? And then, is there a monitoring system in place? And are you able to measure the percentage of your procurement which is green? So this is what we have for the moment as sub-indicators. We also do a global monitoring of SPP, and you can find this online, the 2 documents here, a global review, and then we have fact sheets for specific countries that is also in the annex. What are the main findings of our latest global review? The key lessons are that governments are, as I said earlier, all moving towards a strategic use of procurement as an instrument to achieve policy goals. So this is now accepted across the board. Then training and provision of information is continuous to build expertise. This is what we're going to do here. Then peer collaboration and coordination with the market are increasing to maximize efficiency. We have to talk to the market, we have to engage the market, we have to involve the market in developing solutions. Monitoring is becoming a key issue, and private sector is making big progress. Let's take that into account. We now have a moving private sector, and we have really to interact with them, to learn from them, and to synergize our efforts. And we have to speak about not just private or public, we have to speak about institutional purchasing. Why institutional purchasing? Because these organizations, large organizations, as was said in the introduction earlier, are uniquely positioned to demand transparency into the upstream and downstream impacts of goods and services, because they're big. And they're capable of incorporating sustainability criteria into purchasing decisions at a scale that can shift market. We can transform market. We can influence the market, especially if we are united and we have coherent demands addressed to the market. The challenges we're facing is that many countries do not yet monitor SPP implementation. It's complex. We will see that. It's estimating the impacts and benefits of SPP is also something that is not yet spread out. In terms of perspectives, we are seeing an increasing importance of social aspects as cross-benefits between environment and social are realized, and SPP is becoming a key instrument to achieve SDGs. There is really an understanding of this. The drivers of SPP that we found is, of course, the need to have policy commitment, strong political leadership. This is an issue which is important, is mandatory regulation for sustainable procurement. This is helping. The countries that are moving the fastest have this obligation in place. Training, of course, develop expertise, have SPP criteria available, personal commitment from staff. And in mirror, you have the barriers which are still the perception that sustainable product services are more expensive, lack of expertise, lack of policy commitment, and the need to have mandatory rules and legislation. In terms of, and this will be my last slide, Chair, the emerging topics for the area, we see that the need to develop eco-labels, standards, and certifications is key. Climate change, of course, is becoming a key objective. Monitoring, as I said earlier, the need to introduce life cycle costing, to develop e-procurement platforms, to link between social and environment, and transparency in the supply chains. Let's not forget that in the end, good procurement is sustainable procurement. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Farid. You set the bar very high. You spoke exactly 10 minutes. Yeah, it was perfect, you know. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. So the next speaker with this bar high, and for 10 minutes, is Erika Bozzay. And I will introduce you in Czech, okay? Erika Bozzay je vedoucí politická poradkyně v týmu pro zadávání veřejných zakázek, ředitelství veřejné správy a řízení v Organizaci pro hospodářskou spolupráci a rozvoj. V OECD začala Erika Bozzay působit na počátku roku 2014 a před svým působením v OECD pracovala více než 12 let pro maďarskou státní správu a v posledních letech jako státní tajemnice na Ministerstvu národního rozvoje a hospodářství. A jako členka Maďarské rady pro veřejné zakázky se podílela i na vytvoření maďarského systému veřejných zakázek. To znamená, věřím, že tady máme experta více než povolaného. Erika, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Is it enough if I use these microphones? Okay. Then I give it. So thank you very much again. As I was introduced, I'm representing here OECD. I'm pretty sure that most of you are familiar with OECD, especially because the Czech Republic is also a member in the OECD. But just a few words what we are doing in OECD and why OECD is also invited for this conference, which again, I would like to thank to you. So OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, is an international body, and it tries to promote policies to improve the economic and social well-being of people around the world. It has around 35 members, and it provides a forum for governments to meet with each other, to exchange experiences, and to address different problems and issues which are closely linked with the well-being of our citizens and businesses. And of course, public procurement is one of the topics that OECD is dealing with. We are approaching this topic as part of the Public Governance Directorate, But of course, we also try to closely cooperate with other directorates in OECD, such as the Environment Directorate, or those directorate which is dealing with multinational companies. Later I will talk about it, why it is important for us, but also with the competition directorates. So we also try to address public procurement from this multi-dimensional angle because, of course, I guess we all agree that public procurement became a multidisciplinary topic for now. I guess most of the representatives here are coming from contracting authorities. And I can imagine that if you are planning and conducting your own tender processes, usually it's more important for you to meet the deadlines, to somehow stick to the budget of your organization, and also to somehow accommodate all those needs which are coming from the senior leadership level. But on the other hand, we cannot forget about the bigger picture. And you, as individual contracting authorities, either you are a smaller one or a bigger one, from time to time need to stop and look public procurement a little bit different, from a little bit different angle. And think about that all those public contracts that you are concluding on behalf of your own organization is just one contract, and it's part of the whole public contracts that is conducted and concluded by the public administration in order to provide services, public services to your citizens and businesses. If we look at just the numbers, we see that really huge money is spent through public procurement. In the OECD countries, this is around 12%, so 12% of the GDP is spent through public procurement. But even if we don't look at the budget numbers and all this volume of the money which is spent through public procurement, if we just think about all those products, services that we need for providing public services, or if we just think about the road infrastructure, transport infrastructure, or we are just thinking about the food in our schools and hospitals, or the cleaning services, and so on, we also understand that almost all segments of our life are somehow linked with public procurement. So it means that governments, and as part of it, individual public procurement authorities, contracting authorities, really have a big responsibility how they conduct their public procurement procedures and whether they can be responsible in this activity or not. Of course, it's a huge task and demand on the contracting authorities and on the government. And what we saw recently, as we already heard in the previous presentation, that throughout the globe, not just in OECD countries, not just in the European Union countries, but even broader, public procurement is used for strategic purposes. So governments realize that they can use public procurement to achieve different strategic policy objectives, such as sustainability or social cohesion or supporting SMEs, or even nowadays we talk a lot about gender mainstreaming through public procurement, but also promoting socially responsible supply chains in public procurement. But I would like to somehow emphasize here that of course, OECD, which issued a recommendation on public procurement in 2015, also promotes this kind of strategic use of public procurement. On the other hand, if you see, or if you look at the principles of this recommendation on public procurement, you realize that there is nothing about sustainability or green procurement or social responsibility, at least at the level of the names of this principle. It doesn't mean that there is nothing about this really important issue, but what OECD, together with the member states, decided here is put the focus is on the balance and giving this message to the countries that it's really important to use, again, public procurement for strategic purposes. But on the other hand, you always have to balance these goals with the primary aim of public procurement, which is mainly to ensure effective public services and to respect the value for money principles. So this is what is included finally in the OECD recommendation on public procurement. Again, it promotes the strategic use of public procurement. It thinks that it's really important, but on the other hand, it also gives some guiding principles to the countries that they have to always take into account the primary goal of public procurement as well. And the principles give some guidance to the countries how they can do this kind of balancing. So first of all, they always have to evaluate whether public procurement is the best option to achieve this particular goal. For example, whether we can support the development of SMEs through public procurement, or there are some other good policy options to support their development and success in our economies. But also important to take into account the capacity of the public procurement workforce, whether they have already the capacity to incorporate all these social, environmental, or other considerations. But we always also suggest to our countries to develop a strategy, and this is absolutely aligned with what Farid just said earlier. And when we are talking about strategy, we usually suggest to develop a strategy on the national level, because even if you have a legal framework which promotes the socially responsible public procurement, green public procurement, and as we are in the European Union and the European Union legal framework gives you this possibility, it's still a really important message for the whole public procurement community that they are encouraged to use all these opportunities. And it's also a really important message, not just to the public procurement community, but also to the business sector, that the government on a national level would like to advance with this agenda. And the State Secretary from the Ministry of Agriculture mentioned the oversight bodies and the control bodies. It's also really important, and it's also an important message for them to follow or take into consideration that it's an important message for them. But we also suggest to develop strategies on the level of the individual contracting authorities, and try to set up not just a strategy, but also action plans with goals and also with measures for implementing, for example, socially responsible procurement in your own organization. And finally, what is really important, always assess the impact and measure the results. And recently, OECD did a survey about the implementation of the OECD recommendations in the OECD member states. And again, our results are fully aligned with the UN global research. Even in the OECD countries, we found out that nowadays, most of them already developed some kind of strategies in terms of sustainable public procurement, especially for green procurement and also for innovation. Most of them also have strategies how to support SMEs through public procurement. And there is also an upward trend for socially responsible public procurement, or we use the term responsible business conduct in public procurement. But when it comes to the follow-up and the monitoring, unfortunately, most of the countries are lagging behind. So they already set up a lot of strategic goals, but they don't really follow up. If we look at separately the different policy objectives, we can see that there are more measurement, more monitoring for the so-called green procurement, and also they can follow more what is happening in the field of SMEs and SMEs support through public procurement. But when it comes to innovation and socially responsible public
Erika,
procurement...
I don't want to force you too much, but maybe we can follow up
Yes.
later.
So when it comes to socially responsible public procurement, most of them are not really following up and not monitoring. But it may be not just their own fault, because I think we have to admit that these are more complex topics, and we don't really have universally accepted measurement frameworks for it. There are some experiments with it, and hopefully soon we will have something. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It was still within the limit. Maybe 2 minutes more. That's fine. Thanks a lot, Erika. Dalším třetím řečníkem, řečnicí Anna Lupi z Evropské komise je právní a politická referentka na generálním ředitelství pro růst v Evropské komisi a působí ve své pozici již téměř 5 let. Zabývá se právem a politikou Evropské unie v oblasti veřejných zakázek a jestli se nepletu, tak je podruhé hostem naší konference.
Hello, good morning, everyone. I'm really glad to be here. It seems that lately I'm more often in Prague than I am back home in my home country, which is great because it means that the Czech authorities are actually advancing in their effort to promote responsible public procurement. I guess the European Commission doesn't need that much of an introduction. We are, of course, the bad guys who come up with the proposals for the rules that then will be applied by, I guess, most of you. And actually, I would like to start with that because our reflection in the Commission on how to promote policies on responsible public procurement started with the last reform of the rules, which was adopted in 2014 and is now in force in all the EU member states. And we started with the idea that we finally had a pretty flexible legal framework, which allowed, of course, to use public procurement in a strategic way, so to pursue also other policy objectives and not just as a tool to purchase public goods and services and works. And we knew from our data that public procurement is a very widely used instrument in Europe because it accounts for about 14% of the EU GDP. But at the same time, public procurement is a very underrated tool. It's also a very underrated profession when it comes to officers who actually have to deal with the procurement process. And there's very much a focus on the administrative procedure, the bureaucracy around procurement, and also on using procurement to outsource services and works with the objective of budgetary savings, to put it bluntly. So there's always a focus on buying at the cheapest price. So we asked ourselves how that was compatible in a way with the policies that not only the European Union, but many of the EU member states are pursuing in the field of sustainability and with the demand for more sustainable products and goods that we have among our citizens, but also among other stakeholders. And this is why we came up with the communication in 2017, where we detailed our policy approach to public procurement. And as you can see, the very first priority area is, of course, boosting the uptake of strategic procurement. This is an objective that, of course, has to be balanced when it comes to the EU with what used to be our core activity, which is ensuring fair competition in the internal market. So the idea is that you cannot discriminate among the different businesses, depending on their origin, but also depending on their structure. So we wanted to keep that, because that's very much part also of the rules, and that's what keeps the internal market going. But at the same time, there's a very clear focus also on the directives, in the part that nobody reads, which are the recitals. There's very much a focus also on allowing public buyers to pursue other policy goals. Again, this is what we call strategic procurement, probably in a fairly confusing way, in the sense that by strategic procurement we mean pursuing quality and pursuing policy goals, but we also tend to use it as a synonym for sustainable procurement in the end. And really, when we look at sustainable procurement, we look mainly at two branches, which are, however, complementary, which are, of course, green public procurement. So the idea that you should use public procurement to also reduce the environmental and climate impact of what public buyers are purchasing, but also socially responsible public procurement, so pursuing social goals through public procurement, and these are usually goals that are related to social and professional integration of vulnerable people, compliance with social and labor law, transparency and human rights due diligence in the supply chain, and promoting equality in every way. So once we decided what our policy line was, the question was, what are we doing in practice? Like, what are we trying to offer to public buyers in the EU? We have a range of different tools. Possibly, I mean, they could be bunched in different categories, but we have worked very much on developing guidance in the last few years in different areas of sustainable public procurement and also procurement of innovation. We have what we call an e-competence center for public procurement, which is actually a single portal where we group all the efforts and all the tools that we've produced within the commissions and within the different directorate generals of the commission, so that they are available in a single place for all public buyers to consult. We also have developed some awareness-raising events and tools for public buyers in the EU. So just to give you an idea, on socially responsible public procurement, for example, we have launched an initiative covering 15 member states with workshops to raise awareness on the use of social considerations in public procurement. We've specifically invited to these events public buyers, so procurement officers from small contracting authorities, because we know that they are the ones who tend to be less aware of the possibilities under the current rules to use socially responsible public procurement. We are updating our guidance on this topic, and it should be ready by 2020, and really the idea is to have a lot of examples and a lot of practical recommendations for contracting authorities, rather than having a more policy-focused document. And of course, we're also working on developing good practices and disseminating them. So we're going to start right now a research on in the member states, but also possibly expand it to other third countries whenever possible. On green public procurement, similarly, we have a buying green guide, which is also has a quite practical approach to green procurement. But we've also developed green public procurement criteria, which are essentially standard criteria that public buyers can cut and paste in their tenders, or they can draw inspiration from them to develop something even more advanced. We have life cycle costing tools, also very useful, because carrying out life cycle costing is quite challenging. And we have a GPP training toolkit, which is available for public buyers, with different modules, which are both horizontal modules on green public procurement and more sector-specific. We've also produced a guide on how to attract innovation and innovators in public procurement, and this is also accompanied by a series of examples. And it was published in 2018 and will be probably updated quite soon. And finally, we've also treated the issue of strategic public procurement in the context of relations with third countries, and in the context of participation of third country bidders to European public procurement processes. And the idea is, of course, that all bidders, keeping, let's say, true to the internal market standards, all bidders should be held to high environmental and social standards throughout the procurement process, regardless of their origins. And we've also provided, for the first time, some guidance on abnormally low tenders, which is also an important topic when we're talking about not focusing just on the price of the offer. And finally, I wanted to give you an overview a bit on what are the challenges that we are facing already and we will be still facing for quite a bit in the future. First of all, awareness on how to use green and socially responsible public procurement can never be taken for granted. The larger contracting authorities, the more experienced contracting authorities are, of course, very well aware, and they have the tools and the skills and the support to use the rules to their advantage. But many of our, smaller municipalities are often not aware and unsure of what they can actually do. And it's surprising sometimes when I meet public buyers from smaller contracting authorities, the questions that they ask me, for me, they sound really basic sometimes, but having the reassurance from the Commission or from their central government that they can actually go ahead and do certain things, it means it means a lot to them. Another issue is, of course, the lack of commercial skills and the lack of knowledge of the market, and in general, professionalism in public procurement. As I said before, it's a pretty underrated profession, and that, of course, means that many public buyers are carrying out public procurement procedures on top of other administrative tasks that they have. And the profession is not necessarily valued for the importance that it should have. So we are tackling this in a different, let's say, policy work stream, which is related to the professionalization of public buyers, and I'm probably going to to speak about it tomorrow more in depth. And then, of course, there's the issue of collecting data and monitoring the results of procurement. Many member states in the EU are not doing this yet, or they're not doing it properly. It's partially our fault as well, because we, in terms of European publications, it's very hard to keep track of where strategic procurement has been used, where sustainability criteria have been used, but now we have new standard forms which will help a little tackle this problem. So contracting authorities will be able to indicate whether they're doing green or social procurement. And finally, as a reminder that we also need to keep our own standards high in the Commission, we need to learn how to walk the talk as well. The Commission procurement is, of course, already using our green public procurement criteria. They are doing socially responsible public procurement in certain areas, for example, by using employment clauses. But we still need to push our own procurement people to do what we're asking the member states to do. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Anna. Thanks a lot. I have a question for three of you, because it seems that the goal, the sustainable procurement, strategic procurement, responsible procurement, there's no doubt there's this goal for UN, for OECD, for European Commission. And Erika, I will use your quote that I find interesting. You said that even if you have legal framework, and maybe I can add, even if you have like booklets and you have workshops for procurers, it is important to encourage the bodies and the business sector to do it. And I would like if you could share your own experience with a good example, what happened in a country or in a procuring authority, what encouraged them to do it. If you can share from your perspectives, what worked?
Thank you very much for the question. Yes, I think it's really important to, again, encourage them. Of course, the legal framework is really important because we cannot operate without the legal framework. But as I mentioned, it's not enough. We can see a lot of good examples how can be encouraged, how can the government encourage contracting authorities to use socially responsible or environmental considerations in public procurement. First of all, they need to be encouraged to be innovative. They also have to understand that from time to time they need to experiment, and they shouldn't use the same technical specification and tender documents as they used earlier. I think as we are in the European Union, we can see a lot of good examples from Nordic countries. They are really advanced in this sense. But they are advanced because they also did a lot of work on awareness raising, on creating communities where people could or can meet with each other. Of course, the first step was always issuing some kind of strategy, but then they also issued some kind of guidelines, methodologies. We can have good examples from Sweden, but Norway is not a European Union country, but belongs to the EEA. Norway is also really good in supporting contracting authorities and businesses with developing methodologies, guidelines. And these methodologies, guidelines, usually also includes concrete examples how to incorporate socially responsible or environmental considerations in your procurement process. But they also they created some kind of network, especially because, as Anna mentioned, that we can see that big contracting authorities, big cities, or even middle-sized cities have the resources to be somehow champions for this kind of strategic use of public procurement. And if there is a central agency, then they can somehow facilitate these kind of networks, these kind of, I don't know, joint events for the contracting authorities where they can share good examples. And what they also did, they also reached out the business sector, because I think all of us mentioned that it's also really important to have a business sector which is also mature enough to cooperate in this sense with the public sector. And of course, the business sector is really open for this kind of cooperation. So this is also a tool to bring together the public sector and the business sector and encourage somehow this kind of communication. So mainly these are the good examples. Again, it requires a lot of promotion, a lot of encouragement, but starting with this kind of conferences and more specific topic-oriented workshops and network events, I think it's really good. And maybe just one thing to mention, in Austria, for example, within the BBG, so the central purchasing body, they even set up a specific unit, which is focusing mainly on innovation in public procurement, but they are providing some kind of really good information, support to contracting authorities throughout the country, and helping them to incorporate all these new aspects in public procurement.
Thanks a lot. We will hear more about national authorities in the second panel, but is there something that you mentioned communities, is there something else that works? Farid.
Yes, Peter, thank you. Well, we have to understand that doing sustainable public procurement for procuring entity is not obvious, because it comes on top of the normal practice of traditional practice of public procurement. So it complicates the matters. And for procurers, it can be considered as additional work. So you're charging the boat. And sometimes they're already overworked, and you're adding a layer, in their work. So it's not obvious. Then you have issues of availability of products. You have issues of course, expertise, knowledge. The prices, is something important to understand. So you have a lot of complications and obstacles on the path to SPP. But on the other hand, you have a growing awareness of the strategic nature and the leverage effect of public procurement. So, and this translates into additional political motivation, political willingness, and then in the end, pressure on public procurers. And some public procurers are themselves motivated because it gives them really a sense, a feeling that they're contributing to sustainability, that their work, their daily work is useful. And it's important, in our life to feel that we do something useful, for the planet, for society, etc. So it gives them pride and gives them really satisfaction about their work. So this is, what we use also as drivers. And then you have the fact that some countries, they're more advanced than others, they're more conscious than others. Give you the example of Costa Rica, for example, they really want to be climate neutral, and they want to be a model on sustainability. So this helps also putting in place the policies, and Costa Rica is a leader in Latin America. Of course, Northern European countries, you have a strong push for ecology, for sustainability. This translates also into political willingness. I was in Oslo some time ago, and the Greens now, they have a large majority in the city, and of course their policies are going to be even more, in favor of sustainable procurement. Countries like Korea, they also see it as a competitive advantage because they see that if they help their industry transform, innovate, they will be more capable of championing those products on foreign markets, and they use it as a competitive advantage on top of course, environmental consciousness that they have. Thank you.
Yeah, well, The way I see it, I mean, I completely agree with what Farid and Erika said, and I think it is true that being able to be the person who doesn't just buy something through public money, but also tries to pursue some other objective for its own community or for the community at large, is a huge driving factor, especially when the change happens bottom up, let's say, because there are motivated procurement officers out there who are really campaigning proactively to do their job in a slightly different way. It's very important, and this is something that we also struggle a bit within the Commission. It's also important to have political support from up above, of course, if you're trying to change the way you do your procurement. What I find sometimes surprising is that it's hard to convince politicians of the benefits of responsible public procurement, because in theory it should be a political win-win for everyone. They're buying quality goods for their citizens, they're delivering additional added value on top of the purchases that they're making. And it's also a great opportunity for visibility, you know, saying that you've created added social impact in your community. So it's surprising that sometimes it's difficult to persuade the political level, but when this happens, you can really see things starting to move. And I think what helps a lot, especially in a more local context, is starting small and then scaling up some pilot projects. One good example of this is, for example, the city of Ghent. They are doing it in a really smart way because they have an overarching strategy in their municipality to really make sure that they are a sustainable city. And in the field of public procurement, they've started with a couple of small projects, one on food for their canteens, one on responsible workwear that was mindful of the human rights of the suppliers that were involved in delivering the uniforms for the city, essentially. And once they completed these projects, you know, they invested a lot of effort in terms especially of human capital to reflect on how to do these procurements properly. And once they finished this project, they put together essentially a guidance. And they are basically, you know, advertising the work that they've done all across the EU. And I find that this is, first of all, politically very smart because they are promoting their city as this great sustainable city, which is true. But they are also inspiring other public buyers across Europe. So I think that's really a good example of how you can start really small and then make it, you know, create value for the whole union.
Thank you. We used our 50 minutes that we had for the first panel, and I think we can continue our debate even during the break. You know, you can talk to all our speakers, maybe to mention the last topic about the sense of community, about the feeling that you are working in a meaningful field, or about how to get the political support for the public procurement. Thanks a lot for your thoughts, for sharing your thoughts. I hope you will stay with us for the rest of the conference. And we have now 30 minutes break. Máme 30 minut přestávku, kdy se můžete občerstvit a prosím v 11:20, abyste byli zpátky, abychom mohli začít další panel, který už se bude podívat na národní úrovně, jak se implementují principy odpovědného zadávání. Díky moc.